Hey everyone, welcome to Night Owls. Before we get started, just a few announcements. So this is the last Night Owls of winter quarter. We've had a lot of events this quarter. We have a bunch more events next quarter. So right at the beginning of the quarter, the beginning of week 2, the journalist Liz Brunig is coming. She is going to talk to me about must we forgive those who have wronged us? It's a good segue from this movie. And then we have an independent filmmaker, Dan Sallet, who's kind of microfinances and makes his own movies in a maximally independent way, and really excellent filmmaker. We're having him come, and we're going to show 2 of his movies and have discussions after them. And then we're having a philosopher who wrote this book called Games, Agency as Art. His name is C.T. Nguyen. And he is going to talk to me about sort of the gamification of our lives that has happened by way of social media. Okay, so those are our events for the spring quarter. Please come. The way this is going to go is we're going to have a conversation for about 30, 40 minutes. And then I will open it up to Q&A. You can ask us anything. Anyone who asks a question can get a t-shirt or a tote bag, Night Owl's t-shirt or tote bag. And you can leave at any time. This is not a class, so stay as long as you feel like. Leave whenever you want. We won't be offended. Okay, but first, not first. Now let's get started. Arnold, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Arnold Brooks. I teach here at the University of Chicago in the Department of Philosophy, and I'm also married to Agnes. This is my first Night Owls, though I've been to many, but this is my first time here.
Can you guys hear Arnold?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess that's it.
Okay, great. I'm recording this on my phone, just so you know. If you ask a question, it's going to be recorded, though the audio won't be great. So they might only barely hear you. Okay. So there's a moment in this movie where, there's a suggestion that the happy people are also the people who don't really think. Like, happy people and thinkers are 2 separate groups of people. Does that seem true to you about the movie? And then does it seem true to you about life? Do people who think more feel less happy?
I don't think that, but Wait,
you don't think it about the movie or about life?
I don't think that about life. I guess I wouldn't be doing the job that I do if I did think that. But so we do have Patrick, right? Who's happy and not a thinker. And in fact, he's introduced as happy. The first scene where we get him, he's walking through the town and there's like a rainbow over his shoulder. It's really, and he's just this, sort of grin on his face.
And he's saying hi to people and they're saying hi to him.
Yeah, and I guess, my main question is just, is he actually happy, right? That is, he feels happy. He believes he's happy. He describes himself as a happy lad. That's sort of his identity. Like if he had to, when he's sort of called upon to describe himself, he says, I'm happy and I'm nice. Those are the 2 things that he says about himself. So, and then there's the question, is he really happy? Do you think he's happy?
I guess so. I guess the movie gives me the impression that he was happy right up until this day.
Yeah, right. So that's what he says too. He says, I was a happy lad until my friend started acting like a gilly-gooly, right? So, but then we can ask, is that happiness? Is something that's that unstable happiness? His happiness appears, I guess, to depend on this other person. That he's got this friend, and his meeting this friend at 2 at the pub, that's the thing that makes him happy. That's what gives his life, its significance or something. So he's the only happy person, or he's the only person that's obviously happy. We have the other 2 pub guys. I don't know what their deal is. They're sort of a bit flat.
They're like twins.
Yeah, and they sort of repeat one another. Maybe they're happy. But they're not, we have these 2 unhappy people who are thinkers. And that's Siobhan calm. And then we have this happy non-thinker in Patrick. And then we have I don't know, we have Dominic, whatever's going on with him. But I don't know that there's a sort of general happiness and non-thinking thing. And I sort of wonder even if it's right to call Patrick happy. I mean, maybe the problem is that Patrick really doesn't understand his life. I mean, that you know, I was talking to Maccabee, our middle child, who's over there, and his theory was that this is really a story of Patrick coming to understand the world that he actually lives in, namely that it isn't a happy world, that it isn't a happy or good life, that it's actually empty and bad, and he just didn't understand that before because his people were deceiving him. I mean, he was being tricked or something like that.
At some point, Colm says to Patrick, niceness doesn't last. And then that's when Patrick says, maybe you were never nice.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems like a dispute over whether niceness lasts. Like Patrick is saying, look, if it were niceness, it would have lasted. And Colm is saying, no, niceness is not a thing that lasts.
Yeah, so I mean, the movie sort of begins with this perplexing break between Patrick and Colm, and I think it's almost like a miracle, like it's a causal event, right? That you can't just stop liking somebody, you can't just stop being somebody's friend. I mean, even when Siobhan is asked to try to justify that claim, right? Because he says, why can't you stop just being somebody's friend? She says it's because it's not nice, but she's stumped, I think. That is, it's not just that it's not nice, it's that it's impossible. You can't just stop being somebody's friend.
I mean, Dominic says, is he 12? Which suggests when you're 12, you can.
Yeah, but maybe when you're 12, you can't really, you have friends or something. I mean, yeah.
I did this when I was 12, actually. Like, I totally did this.
You broke off.
I broke up with a friend. I was just like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. And she was really upset.
But there was a cause there, if I remember that story correctly.
There's always, it was very similar to this.
Yeah. But in this we have this situation where there is no, so they keep saying, are you rowing, right? Are you fighting? And that would explain it. They had to reach for something. They had to reach for some explanation. Somebody just ceasing to be your friend is like somebody just suddenly out of the blue falling in love with you, or somebody.
Well, that's a thing that can also happen.
Yeah, well, but it's also maybe a bit miraculous, right? Or peace suddenly breaking out between warring parties for no reason. It's just now it's peace. It's over, right? Or war breaking out between friends or something like that. That there's something uncanny about it. And the whole first act of the movie is Patrick, just dealing with this almost miraculous event that they could just break like this, and just trying to come to some kind of an understanding of it.
Okay, but there's two things I would say that. So first is that, like, this thing, are we rowing? Like, by the end, they're rowing, right? It's almost like the whole movie is them getting up to the point where they're rowing. Finally, okay, now we have a war, and now it almost, like, makes sense by the end. And that the beginning is the part where it doesn't make sense. I think it's a really good point about how it's uncanny. So, like, when Siobhan, the first moment where the suggestion of Colm just doesn't like you anymore comes from Siobhan, where he tells her, like, he just didn't come out when I knocked at his door, and she's like, maybe he just doesn't like you anymore, and she sort of laughed, and the audience laughed too. And in fact, when Colm first says, I just don't like you anymore, the audience laughed, I noticed. And it's like, we laugh because it's like, we can't take it in. It's unintelligible. And by the end of the movie, or even by halfway through the movie, that he just doesn't like him anymore is like, becomes deadly serious for the whole audience, and we stop laughing at all those moments. Right? So the audience itself had to get used to this, he just doesn't like you anymore. Like, it's uncanny at the beginning, and then we become accustomed to it, and we become almost like submerged in the horror of it.
Yeah, and in particular, the thing that's sort of miraculous or horrible about it is that there's no explanation for it other than just time. And it's sort of like the idea of the miracle is the idea of something happening without a cause, right? Or at least an otherworldly cause, a cause that isn't part of the world. And maybe we can think of free will that way. Maybe free will is like a miracle in that sense. It's a cause that comes in from the outside. And time is a little like that too. Like imagine that something could just be changed just by time, by nothing but time, right? So, and this is the confusion. It's that Patrick has always been dull. He's always been the same person. Whatever it was that allowed this, at least person who thought he was an interesting, fiddler, to hang out with this dull cowherd, that hasn't changed, right? It's just that Colm has changed, and his only explanation for the change that he might have undergone is just time. It's like, it's time just without change. It's just him feeling the passage of time. And that seems like it's like there's no cause there, or it's a way of talking about something that happens without a cause.
But isn't it like the fear of death showing up for him somehow?
Yeah, right. So we have this thing about despair. He doesn't talk directly about death. He sort of talks about feeling the time whiling away. When they're sitting outside, he talks a little bit about death. And in a sense, that's also an explanation that Patrick jumps to. Right? He also thinks maybe this is about death, right? And it turns out it's not really about death either. It's just about the experience of the passage of time.
So one thought that I had was that maybe Colm's despair, made Patrick's sort of cheery persona unbearable to him at a certain point.
Yeah, right. So we have this, we find out about halfway through the movie that there's this backstory to what's been going on, that it isn't purely acausal. It's not this thing completely out of the blue. It's that this is something that he's been discussing with the priest, right? That he's got this despair. The way he puts it is that Patrick was talking about his donkey's shit for 2 hours, and that he just couldn't take that. He was like timing it. He was. I don't know if it's the cheerfulness or like there is something about Patrick that's a little bit like a dog or a donkey. It's like, he has that relationship to the fear of death or to his own mortality or to finitude or something like that, which is just obliviousness, right? You have loads of time or something like that.
So it's very, very strange to watch a friend break up, someone just break up with their friend. And as you know, I've done this. When I was 12 and also again later. So it's a thing I do, but it's not a thing most people do. Most people, they break up with romantic partners, but with friends, they just kind of drift apart. Yeah. They don't just one day say, I don't want to be your friend anymore. That somehow feels incredibly harsh in a way that, I don't want to be your boyfriend or your wife or whatever. As harsh as that is, doesn't seem as bad. So why? Why is it so harsh to be saying, I don't want to be your friend anymore?
Yeah, so for me, the first question about this movie that jumps out to me is, why didn't Colm sit Patrick down and say, listen, Patrick, I've enjoyed my time with you. I think you're a fine guy. I need some time for my music, so I'm not going to do the pub at 2 o'clock thing anymore. I'll meet you here at 6. That's such an obviously correct answer to the problem. Patrick says, why is fingers the first thing you're going to? It's the solution here is so obvious that I think the way we have to read it is that the breakup is the point. We really don't do this with people. You're weird, and Colm is weird. And in general, we do just drift apart. We start, not answering calls and being like, oh, yeah, sorry, I've been busy. I've been really, really busy. As if that ever is true. But we just let people drift apart. We just.
Okay, but you're not answering my question. Why? Why don't we do it? Why, in a romantic context, we don't just let people drift apart. We tell them, I don't want to be in a romantic relationship with you anymore. So why do we not tell our friends, I don't want to be your friend anymore?
Yeah, I think that there's something impossible about it. That it's. I don't know what it is. That there's something that lies outside the structure of the relationship. You can't do that. You have to find something to have a fight about. You have to find a reason, right? I mean, even the sister, in some sense, can't leave until there's the fingers being thrown at the door. That's what gives her the ability to leave, is that suddenly she can say, it's because of this that I'm leaving, and not
No, because she tells him I'm leaving before they come home to find the fingers.
Yeah, but I guess it's like,
but the previous finger's already been thrown. Fair enough.
Yeah. And that there sort of has to be a reason for things like that. Like, you can't just say we're done. It's sort of impossible. Like, even in romantic relationships, right? You can't break up with somebody unless you come up with a reason. And sometimes you have to just invent something, but you can't just leave. Like, there's something just kind of impossible about it. I'm not really sure why, but it really is. You just can't do that.
Okay, so suppose that the breakup is the point, and that it's not that Colin wanted time away from Patrick. It's that he somehow wanted this, like, traumatic thing. It's almost like he wanted the thing that happens at the end where there's, like, a war and they're rowing. Let's suppose that for the moment.
Yeah.
That he didn't want peace. That he says he wants peace. He says he wants silence. What he actually wants is a war. Because this would be the way to get a war. Why would he want that?
Yeah, I mean, why does he seem so cheerful about cutting off his fingers, too? I mean, he seems proud of it. He's sort of fascinated by his hand. He, like, holds it up to the light. And then later on, he says that it's like a burden that's been lifted from me, this cutting off of the fingers. And I sort of think maybe, I mean, I've been thinking about your stuff about Socrates and wavering and stuff like that, where the way people, when they don't understand something, they go back and forth on it, right? They say one thing and then they say the opposite a little bit later, and that Socrates is good at bringing that out in people, the way that they waver. And one way to solve wavering is to just do things you can't take back. Like, we would take everything back. If you gave us enough time, we would take everything back, and we would do it again, and we'd take it back, and we'd do it again, because we just don't have a real sense of what's happening to us or what we're trying to do. But if you cut your fingers off, you can't take that back. And it looks like a decision. It feels like something that you can settle on, right? And cutting off a friend is an attempt to maybe do that. Or burning a house down. Or fighting a civil war or something like that, just shooting people in the street. I mean, these are things that you can't take back, and so now it feels like you're acting with...
It feels like you're moving forward.
Yeah, it feels
you're making
like,
progress.
Yeah, now you've accomplished something, right?
There's a great moment, and since you brought up Socrates, there's a great moment in the Crito where Socrates' friend Crito is trying to get him to escape from jail so he cannot be killed. This is after he's been sentenced to death by the city of Athens. And Crito's like, so I think now maybe you're going to admit, Socrates, that actually you should care what the majority of people think about you. Maybe it's this time you're going to admit that. And Socrates is like, nah, the majority, like, they'll put me to death. And if they could bring me to life again, they would do that later. That's like your point about wavering, right? Like the finality is only in the thing. It's not in the person. So maybe he wants some kind of final thing. I mean, that would be a good explanation of why he would do something that seems so counterproductive to the fact that what he wants to do is produce music, and he is also preventing himself from doing that. Like, even with your interpretation, I find that very mysterious. Like, why did he pick the one form of self-mutilation that would also interfere with the reason he was giving for wanting to be free from Patrick?
Yes, the two sort of lines we have on that are, one, when he's first threatening to do it, he says, I'll cut the fingers off my left hand, my fiddle hand, right? So the hand he's going to do the strings with. And then later on, when Siobhan says that you won't be able to play music if you cut off all your fingers, he says, now we're getting somewhere. And those are both pretty mysterious comments, but it seems like he's very deliberate about making sure that the self-mutilation in question, it's not really about the hands, it's that it's mutilating his ability to play music.
Yeah, it's a real cost for him.
Yeah, that he's destroying the thing that he's supposedly getting out of this breakup with Patrick. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure why he wants to make that. One thing you might say is just he wants to be free of the burden of needing to be somebody. And one way to do that is to compose a tune so that you are somebody. And another way to do that is to make it impossible for you to compose a tune so that you don't have to be somebody.
But isn't like whiling away your hours aimlessly chatting with Parrick just the perfect way of freeing yourself of the burden of needing to be somebody?
No, because then it's there. I mean, you've got to sit with it and be listening to this man talk and thinking like, this is my life. This is what my life is supposed to be like. Like, aren't I supposed to be somebody? Aren't I supposed to accomplish something? And if you can somehow make it impossible for yourself, then that's a relief. It's like it's to save yourself from that.
I feel like in some way, Colm and Siobhan are presented as almost the same person at different stages or different ages. Like, my support for that is that they're both put forward as thinkers, and then where there's a scene between them where Colm says something like, "Don't you ever think you're entertaining yourself while staving off the inevitable?" And she says, "No," and he's like, "Yes, you do. I.e., you're like me. I can recognize a kindred spirit." Doesn't that seem right to you? And are we supposed to interpret her getting off the island as something like her finding an alternative solution to this problem so that she doesn't end up like him?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely, or at least Colm thinks that they're sort of in a parallel situation, that they're both thinkers. The other, the barmen, they think that Siobhan is a thinker like Colm, right? That in some sense would not have been an odd coupling if those two had been friends. And so, I mean, one thing is you asked me to, which is totally fair, to come up with some questions for you. And that was going to be one of my questions for you, is just...
Too late, I asked you.
Is just, what is a thinker, right? What is it that they have in common? That is, what is it to be a thinker in the sense that they are thinkers?
I guess I thought that was animating my first question to you. I thought it was something like you live your life with a need to scratch below the surface so that even if things seem okay, you're like probing at it and thereby almost potentially undermining the sources of your stability and happiness. So I thought the movie was presenting thinkers as people who are going to be like that unhappiness was like an occupational hazard or something of being a thinker.
Yeah, I mean, maybe being a thinker is something like, because, thinking about it in terms of what the goal is going to be, right, as opposed to a kind of like neurotic habit. That maybe to be a thinker is to be somebody who tries to find in themselves something that'll make them good or complete or that give them a meaningful life or make them whole or something like that. And that the non-thinkers are the people who don't try to find that in themselves. It's not clear that they're trying to find it in some other way. Maybe it just sort of, shines down on them the way it seems to shine down on Patrick at the beginning. But that maybe the thing that Siobhan and Colm have in common, that Colm sees them as having in common, is that one way or another, maybe you'd say that they're cut off or something like that, but they have to find the thing that they need in themselves. They can't find it in other people. They can't find it in, civil struggle. They can't find it in anything but their own resources. And neither of them are able to do that.
Okay, I disagree with that. So I remember when Siobhan says, "Don't you ever feel lonely?"
Yeah.
Like, I think she's lonely, and she wants other people to commune with. I don't think she's looking for the answers inside of herself. I think that's why she leaves. And I guess my thought was Colm is lonely too, and his loneliness has become twisted into this thing where, like, I'm going to leave an eternal image of myself through my music that isn't really that good anyway, but I can sort of tell myself that it is, because I've given up on people. I've given up on human connection. But she hasn't given up, and she's not searching within herself. She's wanting to meet other people. She's like, the people here on the mainland are nicer and happier, and I like them better.
Yeah, so maybe Colm is just wrong that they have that in common. But he definitely thinks that she's got the same curse, right? And I mean, she disagrees, I think, or she doesn't ever really respond very directly. I mean, in the first at the pub where he first says this, that she understands him, she just walks out, right? And the second time she says, "No, I don't. I'm not just entertaining myself to hold off the inevitable." But he doesn't he says, yes, you do. And she doesn't, she just leaves then again, too. She doesn't press the point.
You do wonder why they don't become friends. Colm and Siobhan, right? They seem compatible, but no. Okay, wait, I want to... we can take a little bit longer. Is this movie a comedy?
Yeah, I also found it confusing that it was so funny. Because it really is very funny. I mean, it's almost a little bit too funny, like the hook on the stick line. I thought that was very funny, and I wasn't, I mean, Dominic is obviously it's a very sad arc for him. And we laugh at him a lot.
But he's also the most lovable character, like, I think by far. For me, even more so than Siobhan.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one that's sort of goodish, right? That is, he even balks at that petty revenge against the music student. Yeah, I guess to take a step back and think about the way that the movie was made. Why was it made to be funny? Right? Why was this sort of written as a comedy right up until the last 20 minutes or so? And I don't know. I mean, does it feel to you like it makes the sort of tragedy of it more poignant that it's funny?
It feels like a way of selling the tragedy, like where it's like you start watching this movie and you're like, oh, this is funny, this is amusing. Oh, a guy's breaking up with his friend, how weird and funny, right? And it kind of hooks you and sucks you in to its world through being funny and through entertaining you. And then you're sort of invested. And then when he first cuts off the finger, you're just like, it's very shocking because it's suddenly become real in a way. So I feel like when you're watching like a Greek tragedy, from the beginning, or like, I've just been teaching Othello. It's like, it's from act one, this is not going to end well. And you almost have steeled yourself against it. You're like, okay, everyone's going to die. It's a tragedy. Everyone's sort of supposed to die. So you almost don't invest. And so I feel like the humor is at least partly a way to pull you in and to get you to invest so that the tragic force has more impact.
Do you think modern people need that in order to feel a tragedy in a way that ancient people didn't?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like in the ancient world, there were tragedies and there were comedies and they were different plays, and you knew which one you were going to see. If you wanted to laugh, you would go to a tragedy. You wanted to, be sad, you go to other way around. I mean, this is an unusual movie, though. It's not like most tragic movies have a lot of funny parts.
Yeah.
So I guess I wouldn't generalize from it. It's clever. It feels like a bit of a clever move that the filmmaker came up with, where they get around our distancing by using humor. It also seems like it relates to the Banshees comment. So where Colm says maybe we do have Banshees, but they're just amused and observe. And I almost wondered whether we're supposed to be the Banshees, like the viewers of the movie who are just watching and kind of laughing.
I mean, there is a literal banshee in the movie. I mean, there's that horrible old woman.
We talked about this. I don't think she's a banshee.
Well, she pretends the death of one of the characters. That's what banshees do. He says that in the movie.
Okay.
She's fine. Definitely a banshee.
Fine.
But like what I mean that for me is the thing that I still really don't understand about.
And she smiles a lot too.
Yeah, and she seems amused, right, in weird ways, and she observes. She's all over the place. She's on the cliff, like magically, like she can move very quickly when she's not on camera, right? And she's just sort of present and observing all of the major events in the movie, like. I mean, right at the end in that last meeting, she's there to observe it.
Yeah, she also has the best line in the movie, at least my favorite line, when she says, I'm not trying to be nice, I'm trying to be accurate.
Yeah, I like the way that she says accurate,
yeah,
very accurate.
She's accurate, right? And so, but it was an interesting moment, right? Because there was this battle over niceness, right, between all the characters, where it's like, Colm, you're not being nice, and he's like, I can't be nice anymore, but she's like stepped outside the space of nice. She doesn't care about niceness. She's not, in some ways, she's like disconnected. She doesn't seem to care that Siobhan avoids her. Like, she knows everyone avoids her. She doesn't care that people avoid her. She brings up, the death of their parents. That's the first thing we hear her do is say, how long has it been since your parents died? So I guess maybe we're meant to contrast her kind of disconnection with everyone from the kind of disconnection that Calm is looking for from Perrick.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, the niceness thing is interesting, and I think you're right. I mean, she seems to be out of the niceness game in a really deep way. Like, nobody expects her to be nice, and she isn't nice, and everybody finds her sort of unpleasant. But she seems sort of like, I mean, the fact that she carries this hook staff around.
Well, she doesn't until the end, right?
Well, she does kind of throughout that whole last thing, well after it's ceased to be important to the actual dragging out of the body, right? Mm. She carries it in the last scene. She's got over her lap or something like that. Like it's a kind of like, like it's the scythe or something. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of emblem of her office. She's like a part of the island in a way. But I did want to ask you about the nice thing, because sort of halfway through the movie, I think it's like on the Wednesday-ish, between the two Sundays, there's that scene in the bar where he gives that drunken speech about niceness, and it's like he gives this theory, right? He gives this account of what's happened and what their relationship is and what's going on, and a kind of denunciation of Calm, and then it seems very satisfying, right? And he seems to walk out very satisfied, and then it's gone. And that falls apart. And so, like, one of the questions about the movie for me is just what happens to that theory? Like, why do we get a kind of collapse afterwards, such that we have to end up in this basin of just rage, where now he's going to destroy Calm's life, and I think by the end of the movie he's going to continue to destroy Calm's life.
Yeah, it's sort of like there's this epiphany that's not very stable. This epiphany about, I want to be a nice, happy person. It almost feels like he just becomes convinced by the world around him that being a nice, happy person is actually a terrible thing to be. It makes him a loser, like Dominic. He doesn't want to be a loser. That the island starts to divide into winners and losers, the people on the top and the people on the bottom, and his happiness makes him someone on the bottom.
Yeah, or just that there's something kind of unstable. I mean, you're right that he gets this idea in his head that he shouldn't be a pushover or something like that. Though he isn't a pushover. I mean, from the beginning, he's pretty harsh with. I mean, it seems to me that he stands up to himself. He stands up for himself with Calm from the beginning. I mean, he says, "Are you going to be an idiot again today?" And he yells at him. He says, "You were being harsh with me. You were being harsh with me today too." Like, it's not like he doesn't voice his complaints. It's just that he keeps looking for a kind of end to it such that they can keep talking. And you really get the sense that if he'd come in, barged in, and yelled at Calm, and then he had not offered to go to the pub later, it would have been fine. But it's the fact that he offered to go to the pub later that made it worthy of the rest of the guy's fingers. But he gets it into his head that he's got to stop. He's got to be a different kind of person. That the kind of person he had been doesn't work anymore. And I don't know. I mean, I guess my thought was sort of like, when he finds rage, he finds something that he can really be about. Like, he finds something in himself that can be a sort of place for him to act from and to think from. And that what he's been looking for throughout the whole movie is this, to find a point of stability. And it just turns out that the point of stability is just this basin of rage where he gets to just wage an endless war against this man.
I mean, it seemed like the two possible points of stability were either they start being friends again and things go back the way they were, or they hate each other and they're at war. And in effect, the movie was about how there is no equilibrium between those two. That is, you're either in the one or in the other. And so, if you and I are friends, either we can be friends or we can be enemies, but there isn't something in between. And Calm seems to at least be suggesting in much of the movie there could just be something in between. We could just be nothing to each other. And Perrick is not that just isn't working for him as a persona or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so why is it that, I mean, because there are people that can somehow find that equilibrium. Like
maybe not on a small island.
Yeah, but like you and Ben sort of have that equilibrium, right? You're friends. And so, like, how did you do that? I mean, I've never found that. Every time I step away from somebody through a breakup, a friend, a relationship, it's always, we're enemies. Because we don't have any middle ground. So how do you get to the middle ground?
We were never not friends. So we never had to recover from, a we're not talking to each other kind of break. So I don't know how you recover from it, because I didn't have to go through that. I mean, I guess I think that in the other cases, the way people do it is they actually physically move away from one another so that they're not in any kind of communication. And, we live in a world where that's pretty hard, because if you're on social media, whatever, you're in some sense in contact with a lot of people, even if they're not physically close to you. Maybe in that way, this movie is very timely, because we're at a time where it's sort of hard to be totally separate from other people. But that's all I can think of as the way to do it. It seems like the way that people do it is by the way that people have peaceful separation is just physical distance and no communication. And otherwise, it's war or friendship.
Yeah, and I think that maybe the war or friendship, they sort of come from the same thing. Because the thing that seems really intolerable to both of them, and especially to Patrick, were these moments, this is the most heartbreaking thing. I was choking up when I was watching this. These moments where he sees his friend, or there's a kind word, or he thanks him for taking care of his dog, and he's just overwhelmed by happiness. And he has to just walk away from that. And that's the thing that's hard for him. It's not the meanness. It's that he's still happy to see Calm.
Yeah.
His heart still leaps when he sees him, whenever he sees him. And to be in this situation where your heart should leap every time you see somebody, but you're supposed to never talk to each other, that seems impossible. It seems like you'd have to destroy them or something like that. You'd have to somehow move away, or just get away from them, or find some way to be angry at them, maybe.
Okay, I have one last question, and then you can ask me one last question if you have one, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So here's my last question. Actually, I'm also going to ask this to the audience. Are you Team Calm or Team Park? I'm just going to ask Arnold first, and then we'll actually, I should just think in your head what your answer is. Your answer can also be neither. Okay, I'll ask you guys. You can also be neither. Okay, who is Team Calm? Okay, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-ish, something like that. Okay, who's Team Park? Whoa. Okay, I'm not even going to count. So Park clearly won that one. Okay, Arnold, what's your answer?
So an interesting thing is I noticed a fair number of my students were on Team Calm.
Are you on Team Calm?
I sympathize, I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
You're just going to try to sympathize with both?
Yeah, it feels like a real tragedy in the sense that, of course, Calm is sort of pretentious and silly, and he thinks he's, a person of destiny, and it seems like he's probably not. I mean, it seems like Siobhan is sort of right about him, that he's just as boring as the rest of them. He's just, he has these high ideas for himself. But at the same time, it's like he has the idea. He has the idea of life having some kind of significance, of him doing something beyond himself or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, there are these two pictures of a human life that I cannot disentangle myself, which is, the one is the picture of a story of a glorious achievement or a downfall or whatever, and it's a kind of story, it's a kind of tale that you tell. And that's the way Calm sees himself, or that's the way he thinks he ought to be able to see himself.
A hero.
Yeah. I mean, somebody about whom you'd tell a story, or you'd remember something of them, right? And then there's this other picture of human life, and it's the one in which you just are at this moment happy or not happy, or feeling good or feeling bad, or and that's the sort of Patrick kind of picture. I mean, and it has something to do with animals, but it's also the way philosophers tend to understand a good life, right? I mean, philosophers don't talk about this glory nonsense. They think you should just be happy. And I'm so deeply torn about this issue that I cannot decide between these two characters if that's the right picture.
I can't not tell the audience that this is an advertisement for the course that you're teaching. Arnold is teaching a class on this question, that is life in the sense of, living happily along, Patrick style, versus a life in the heroic sense of achieving something. Next year?
In the fall, yeah.
In the fall, okay. So if you want to talk more about that, take this class. Okay, do you have a final question for me?
We've ended up talking about a lot of them, but I do have a question. It's a little bit of a lame one.
Okay.
Is the song about Patrick? Or what's the song about?
It's about Patrick's death, apparently.
Yeah. Or why does he think? Why does he say, "I've been having these thoughts about playing it at your funeral"?
I think he feels like he could feel so much love for Patrick if only Patrick were dead. He's like imagining the love that would be pouring out of him, and he does feel bad for him when he gets punched, right? And he feels bad for him when he loses Donkey. He notices that he can care for him, just not when he has to hang out with him. So I think that, but I don't know what the song is about him. I just think maybe this song is like an expression of his love, but the love that is not consistent with actually spending time with him.
Or the only way you can understand Patrick's life is as something to memorialize.
Yeah, maybe it would be about him, and then people would remember him.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you raise your hand, and I think Avery will be coming around with a microphone, and we're just going to kind of randomly, call on people. Of course, yeah.
Okay, I'm a little bit curious about, again, the point of the comedy, and I'm convinced by what Dr. Callard said about it sort of drawing us in, so it's almost a strategy to show us the absolute corrosive power of this kind of violence. It destroys everything in the world, including our laughter. And that's why I kind of think this kind of violence is completely irrational. It seems impossible to me to be team either when they're it's cyclical and it destroys everything. And so you've already answered this question somewhat, but I'm still curious about it. Is it ever possible to cease this kind of violence? To me, it seems almost like this kind of violence, the point of the state is to cease this kind of violence, and the state in this movie is completely absent. Even as the police officer is there, it's not really analogous to a modern police state. He's integrated in the community, it's not really violence from above. So is it possible to cease this kind of violence?
I mean, of course, in the background is civil war, right? With sort of a kind of parallel situation of Irish people fighting Irish people, Irish Protestants fighting Irish Catholics. And so it's almost how is the state going to solve the problem when the state is in the problem, right? I guess I had a thought about, your thought is this is totally irrational. And, there's a way in which that's true, but there's a way in which, by the end of the movie, it really feels like the only possible way that this could end up is in this feud. Are you rowing? Where there had to be a row. It had to turn into a row. And so in that sense, it was inevitable. There was this kind of tragic result that had to take place. Now, we could still call it irrational, but it seems as though it's a kind of predictable result of a certain form of interaction where, on some level, maybe nobody's doing anything wrong to start out with, right? Colm doesn't want to be friends with this guy anymore. Patrick is no, you're my friend, right? And that just turns into this situation. It turns in almost naturally, not because anyone did anything wrong, right? So I'm not sure if I want to call it irrational. At least I want to say it's sort of inevitable and deep, and is the product of rational moves. All the moves are rational in a way. How does it end? I think that I really like the thing Arnold said at the beginning about how it almost feels like a miracle, or it starts out of nowhere. And I almost feel you just need another miracle somehow for it to end. I did have a Night Owls with Chris Blackman, who wrote this book about war, like it's called Why We Fight. And he's really interested in these extended fighting situations. Like, why does fighting go on so long in certain parts of the world? There's just these persistent fighting, for instance, in Ireland. He just thinks, well, there's just there's like 5 different causes or something like that. But there isn't some one general theory about how you solve it. But it feels to me like it would take a miracle somehow to end it.
Yeah, I mean, so in the confessional, in the second time Colm was in the confessional, the priest asks if he thinks God cares about miniature donkeys, and he says, I fear that he doesn't, and that's where it's all gone wrong. And I sort of think that that's the movie's attempt to sort of address this question. It's sort of like, there are moral reasons. There are like justifications for war. There are like reasons why we might fight and why we might think it's okay or it's legitimate to fight. But the actual texture of conflict and people's motivations for violence is so much finer that it's almost as if you'd have to care about miniature donkeys if you really wanted to prevent war. You'd have to care about these silly little animals that people love, and we can't, make sense of the world that's that fine-grained. Where the start of this conflict is that the donkey choked on his severed finger. I mean, how could you think of that in terms of like the justice of a conflict? You're in my Aristotle class. Like we talk about what justice is and what are the grounds for retributive justice, and like we never consider stuff like this. I mean, but it is the cause of war. I mean, this is really how it happens. And so, at least the movie's take on it seems to be that, whatever theories we might come up with about the rationality of conflict, the reality of it is so particular and so fine-grained as far as people's motives and the sort of backdrop of conflict that it'll look like it's coming out of nowhere, and there's just it'll feel like it's totally rational. But to the people engaged in it, I mean, it is just justified violence.
I want to add one thing, and then we can move on to the next question. But something that occurred to me was, if people live close together, they're just gonna sometimes hurt each other, and in fact, sometimes kill each other, like accidentally. That's just gonna happen in any group of people. Today, Arnold, who's hurt his leg really badly, today I kicked his leg, basically the leg that he had hurt really badly, and it hurt him so much, that 40 minutes later it still hurt from my kicking him. And now Arnold knows that I wasn't trying to hurt his leg, right? I wasn't trying to cause him this pain that I did cause him. And he had goodwill about it. But imagine if we had been in some really, really deep fight, and I had just kept on saying how much I hate him, and I think he's dull, and I don't want to talk to him anymore, or whatever. And then I hurt his leg, right? That's you can imagine if Colm had accidentally killed the donkey, before when they were friends, it would have been forgiven. But so there's stuff where we're going to need to be able to forgive each other because we're going to hurt each other. And then the absence of friendship makes those things unforgivable. Oh, and sorry, just before you ask your question, you can, after you ask your question, you can come and get a t-shirt, or you can wait until the end. It's up to you, either way, okay? It's fine to come and walk up, or whatever. Yeah?
Hi, I had 2 questions, somewhat unrelated, but I can ask them both anyway.
Okay.
The first one is, this could be, I guess, as it pertains to the character of Parag or in general, but what hurts more for Parag or, again, in general? The loss when a friendship is broken or lost. The loss of the friend, or feeling like something is wrong with you. Like, what's wrong with me that this person no longer wants to be friends with me? Which I think we see a little bit of both throughout the film. I don't know if I should ask the second question.
Go ahead, ask the second one. I'm writing it down. So.
Then the second question is, how real is the friendship between the two characters if all they talk about is nonsense, kind of idle chatter? And is this idle chatter because they can't truly connect with one another, or because they're on this tiny island where there's nothing more to discuss?
Great. Arnold, do you have an immediate response?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like it's the indignity that hurts the most, at least at first. I mean, he's asking, Patrick is asking himself, is he dull? Is he stupid? Do people make fun of him behind his back? Like, what did he do to deserve being cut off like this? The scene that I mentioned where he, as it were, gives his theory, and there's this confrontation between the you have to leave something to posterity view of life and the you should just be nice view of life. Is in a way it's an attempt to just explain that, and it's an attempt that focuses on the badness of Patrick, right? And that's sort of what they concentrate on. But it seems like they leave that, and that at least the second half of the movie, the part of the movie where things get really violent, it really is about the loss. Like, it's about this separation and the fact that more and more Patrick doesn't know what to do with his afternoons anymore. Like, he doesn't have anything to do or say. Like, he just sits there smoking in the chair with his sister or something like this. He's sort of lost. And that's the thing that eventually I think really gets to him. So I think that there's this immediate question, who am I to deserve being cut off like this? But in the end, he's really hurt much more by the loss of the friend. I mean, it's sort of a loss of himself, right? I mean, maybe one way to put it is, he's supposed to be nice. That's who he is. But he loses the person that he's nice to. And so he can't be nice anymore. Who's he supposed to be nice to? He no longer has a beneficiary, right? And so he sort of loses that part of his identity. And maybe that's the answer to why the theory falls apart. It's just, it ceases to be true of him that he can be nice because he loses the person.
Yeah, one thing that, I agree with Arnold that they're both important. I think there's a sort of a third thing, which is that somebody, it's like, imagine somebody breaking up with you, but you're still living in the same apartment, and you keep thinking we could get back together. And there's a certain kind of insanity that breeds. So I think that if Colm had left the island or died, he would have lost a friend, but he would have dealt with it very differently. And I think even setting aside even if Colm had said, I'm leaving the island because you're so dull, still, I think it wouldn't have had the negative effect that it had. I think being around someone whom you're not allowed to talk to, it's like being around a ghost or something. It's like there's this ghost person that's in your life, but they're not there, and you keep seeing them, but you can't interact with them. And even Colm himself has trouble with restricting himself from interacting with Parak. So in the drunken scene, Parak does not address Colm until Colm addresses Parak. Colm is like, go away or whatever, and then Parak's like, you talk to me, you weren't supposed to, right? So there's this kind of almost impossibility. So I think it's losing your friend when also in some way you didn't lose them and they're still there, and the temptation of them possibly becoming your friend again, where you're constantly thinking, oh, it's April 1st, maybe that was an April Fool's Day joke, oh, maybe he's depressed. You're constantly being forced into these ruminations of what if. That is the thing that makes it so hard for him. Okay, we have the second question. How real is their friendship if it's just idle chatter? Arnold, I guess your view is that it's not very real.
No, I think it's real.
Oh, okay.
But I don't understand friendship at all. I think it's completely confusing. I was just teaching Aristotle's view of friendship, which is terrible. Some of you know I love Aristotle, and so it's hard for me to say that. But
wait, you think 9-9 is terrible? Any 9-9?
No, it's not all terrible.
Okay.
But the basic idea is that there are these three kinds of friendships. There's friendships of pleasure, right, where we just take pleasure in each other's company. There are friendships of utility, and then there are virtue friendships, right? But explain to any of your friends, any of them, because virtue friendships are incredibly rare, right? only between virtuous people who are like, teammates or whatever, and explain to any of your friends that this is the friendship that you have with them. Oh, it's a pleasure friendship, and you're done as soon as I stop taking pleasure in your company. And they will cease to be your friend instantly. But it's clear that, in a way that, it's almost like Colm thinks of Patrick that way, but it's clear that it's killing him to do this. Colm, like the scene where he's holding his fist to his mouth when he's sitting on the wall, it really hurts him to cut Patrick out. And it's just that they have this time that they've had together, that the friendship has been something that's been a part of their lives for a long time. Aristotle has no way of accounting for that. And I also don't understand what that is. Like, what is it that people mean to each other just through time? That's the other thing time alone is doing in this movie that I don't understand, and also in life.
I wonder if the movie itself puts us in that position of creating a pleasure friendship with us by like being funny for a while, and then we're like committed and we have to stick it out through the like finger choppings.
Yeah. They couldn't have started with the finger choppings.
Right. Okay.
Hi, I was hoping we could return to a question that Agnes actually asked Arnold at the beginning, which is why do we accept breakups when they're among romantic partners and we find them socially unacceptable when they're among friends?
Let's take 3 on that, Arnold.
Yeah, okay. We do find them socially acceptable in romantic relationships. I think part of that has to do with the idea that romantic relationships produce obligations, and there are institutions surrounding them and customs surrounding them where we don't consider it okay for somebody to not be able to back out of those. Those are too serious, right? So you need to have a retreat, right? Like divorce, for example. Marriages are just too serious for us not to at least make some kind of fuss about divorce. They're the kind of thing you have to, that makes a big difference to your life. And so we do consider that socially acceptable, though it's amazing how much damage it does to people given that. If you're all law-abiding people, you'll never in your life do as much damage to anybody as you'll do when you break up with them. That is the way that you will hurt somebody the most in your entire life, and you'll do it 3 or 4 times at best, and it's like torture. If you slapped a stranger in the street and it produced all that pain in them, you'd go to prison for 5 years. It's just really, really, really bad. And yet somehow we have to just tolerate it. And I guess the fact is with friendships is that we don't allow ourselves to do that. We let things ease off in this slow way because the institutions around friendship are kind of loose and you can kind of back out of them slowly. But I think that really hurts too. I've backed out of friendships, but I've also been backed out on, and that it really sucks. I decades later, I still feel it. But I don't know that I have a much better answer than that. Before I said it's impossible. The idea of backing out of friendship doesn't make any sense, and it's like a logical contradiction. And I still want to hold on to some of that point, but I admit I don't have a theory of that.
I think you're basically saying, oh, well, romance is like more important, so that's why we're allowed to back out of it. But I think that's not true. I think the answer is that the view that we have about friendship, which is that you can't just break up with people, is the true view. But we just become insane when it comes to romance. Like, romance makes us literally crazy. We behave in all sorts of ways where if you behaved in that way about anything else, everyone would say, you're a crazy person, you're being crazy, we need to get you some help. Just stuff that's super familiar, right? Like just texting your ex a million times when you know you've told yourself I'm not going to do it again, and you know it's bad for you and you hate them, and you've told everyone you hate them and your friends are like, don't do it. And it's regular, it's normal. We all just behave this way when it comes to romance. So we've all just accepted that romance makes us insane, and we just have to deal with that and live with the fact that people are going to be crazy and they're going to do crazy things. But then when it comes to friendship, we're like, no, that's a real thing where we can be rational humans, and so we can't just like ditch people and do horrible stuff to them, because that's not okay. So we somehow created this like zone of forgiveness for being insane, and that zone is romance.
Hello. One thing that I was struck with in the movie is the sort of metaphor between the fight between Colm and Patrick and the Irish Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they sort of look over the ocean and they're kind of distanced from the fighting. And I think one of the main things we get is that there's sort of no reason why Patrick, or there's no like, it's sort of irrational why Patrick and Colm are engaging in this fight. It doesn't, at the end of the movie, it seems like there's going to be a ceasefire of sorts, but it's going to resume again. But we also get this sense that that Colm is sort of maybe enjoying the fighting. That after tearing off, as Professor Brooks mentioned, after cutting off his fingers, that he's sort of he's proud of doing that. And so I was wondering what you think of this sort of dual sense that on the one side this war is completely irrational and it's never going to end, and on the same token that it's sort of providing maybe a sense of meaning for Colm in doing this. And you know, with the quote of life is just sort of doing all this entertainment stuff until the inevitable death, and sort of just providing entertainment in that sense. So just curious what your thoughts were there.
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of looked this up because I was doing this event, and so the war here is, for anybody who doesn't know this, there's the War for Irish Independence, which was fought in the years previous to this, to the Civil War, and in it the Irish are looking to free themselves from the British Empire, right? And then there's a treaty that's signed, the Anglo-Irish Treaty, and it declares Ireland an independent region within the British Empire. So they still have to swear fealty to the king, but they get to govern themselves. And these 6 northern counties are permitted to actually stay within the British. That becomes Northern Ireland, right? So they're permitted to stay within the British sphere of influence, political sphere of influence. And those are the Free State people who signed this treaty, right? So they get the Free State of Ireland. It's this independent thing. And
The northern part is the Free State.
No, sorry.
Oh.
The Free State people are the people who fought for Irish independence and signed the treaty.
Okay.
And the IRA are the people who are like, no, what we got into this fight for was a completely independent Irish republic. That's what we got into this fight for. That's what we're going to have. And so the Irish Civil War was those two sides fighting because the IRA didn't want to stop until they had what they were really promised. And in a way, the last line is the line of the IRA. It's that sometimes you don't get over stuff. You know, sometimes you don't compromise. Sometimes you don't swear peace. You just keep going until you've won, and you've won everything that you wanted. And by the same token, Colm's attitude is almost like somebody who ostensibly wants peace, right? But in a way, he's satisfied with the punishment of the continued conflict. Like that he sees, maybe he sees some kind of justice in that for himself. Like he sees something appropriate about cutting off his own fingers as a price to be paid for having cut Patrick out of his life. Which in any case he felt it somehow necessary to do. But anyway, if we're supposed to draw a strong metaphorical connection to the Civil War, that was the best I could do.
I think that point about wanting punishment is really right. Like you have to ask yourself, why did Colm escape his house? Like why didn't he just let himself die, right? He seemed to sort of want to die. It's clear that he showed up and sat in his house with the sort of thought, maybe I'll just die. But then in the end, he like gets out, and And when he asks Parik, are we even now? And Parik's like, no. If you died, we would have been, but I'm just going to keep going after you. You don't get the sense that Colm is so disappointed. Like, almost like he's definitely sort of a glutton for punishment. He wants, it's like he was punishing himself by cutting off his fingers, and now he has this guy doing it for him. And if he's going to keep getting punished, he's willing to stick around for that. That feels to him like a reason to stick around. And so maybe, likewise, the analogy is supposed to be that being punished or inflicting punishment can become a source of meaning for your life. It can become like a reason to live. And in fact, you could sort of easily imagine that people who are embroiled in that look at a life that doesn't involve it, a life where you just sort of sit around and, I don't know, you make lunch and you hang out and you have aimless conversations and you pet your donkey or something, or whatever we all do with our lives, is that's kind of nothing to it. It's kind of insubstantial. Right? Whereas it feels very substantial if you feel like you're fighting for a cause, or you're being punished for the cause. You're getting your due or something like that.
Hello. I wanted to ask about like depression and despair, because there seems to be this like mixed definition throughout the movie. Like, for example, the priest is like gravely asking Colm, like, how is your despair? Like this very present sort of entity, more like a clinical depression now, I guess, whereas like Siobhan and what's his name, Parik, are told, like, sort of lightly offering, like, oh, maybe he's in a depression now, and they even ask him, and it seems a bit more ridiculous. So I guess in a way there's a mix of like a deeper depression and like a true suffering versus more like what we were discussing before with a thinker, just someone who's like suffering because of the kind of person they are. But I wanted to ask, do you think that Colm is really in a despair? Whatever that question might mean to you. And I also wanted to ask, was a bit more interesting maybe, does being in a depression or a despair provide you with an excuse to be a bad friend?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it, like, there's a thought that I had on this viewing of the movie, which is, maybe Colm said to himself, I'm gonna kill myself unless I stop being friends with Parik. Like, it's just one day. And like, clearly killing yourself is like a real thing that happens pretty regularly in this world, right? We hear of like a suicide early in the movie, and then Dominic commits suicide. Like, suicide's all over the place. So that's a real thing that could happen. And it's there's a strong prohibition against it, and Colm has clearly talked about it with the priest, right? So maybe he said to himself, that's what I'm imagining, maybe he said to himself, look, it's either break off this friendship or kill myself. So I gotta break off the friendship. And then the question is like, is that justified? And I guess it would certainly be a way of justifying to oneself that one would do such a thing. Like, I could imagine if I were talking to myself and I wanted to justify breaking up with a friend, that would seem like, to me, like a good justification. Probably, well, I'll have to kill myself otherwise. Or I'll end up killing myself otherwise. So it certainly seems like a way of convincing yourself. There's a question, is it really true? And I guess that gets us to the substantiality or reality of the depression, right? Where Parik's first response to hearing about the depression is, why doesn't he bottle it down like the rest of us? Right? Where so he sees it as very insubstantial, and it's almost like you can imagine Colm anticipating that response from Parik, where it's like, he's not going to understand. He's not going to understand just how deep I'm under, and that's why I can't even talk to him about it, right? So there's like, it feels like the movie almost asks us to make a choice of how seriously to take the depression, where if we take it seriously enough, and if we say, Colm could be in a position where he's saying to himself, I will kill myself otherwise, it's almost like hard to argue with that. It's hard to argue that then he should break off the friend, like that's not the right choice. And so, yeah, I guess we are in taking sides between Parekh and Colm, in some sense, we are making a judgment about whether Colm's depression is real or not.
Yeah, so I like what I took your theory or your view of it to be, which is that there are sort of two theories of what's going on here. There's the despair theory, where despair is not a word for an illness, right? It's a word for an emotion. It's a word for a pain in response to something real. Like we despair when we are actually faced with a hopeless situation, right? And depression, which is the counter theory, where it's treated as an illness. It's like, maybe you really are sick, Colm, or something. Or maybe he's just depressed. And there's this worrying thing that we do where, on the one hand, I think that there are really good reasons to treat something like what Colm was going through as a sickness, right? To kind of distance it from reality in such a way that you can say, look, this is a thing you have to be patient with and just treat. And you can get past it, hopefully one day, or at least you can find a way to live with it, or you can mitigate it, or something like that. But then it's, there's this kind of slide where we could do that for every emotion. We could just make all of the whole human experience into a kind of disease that we have to recover from, where what it means to be cured is to just go on, right? To push it down or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, I think the what it would mean to side with Colm on the idea that it really is despair is to identify, be able to find a reason for it. That is, find what it is that's really bothering him. And that's a hard question, right? So he says that he feels the passage of time. Clearly there's something hopeless about his life, that his life should come to nothing, that it should sort of have nothing in it, that it should have no structure, no texture, that he should sort of end up being nobody. And is he wrong about that? I mean, is that a reason to despair? I mean, is there any day of anybody's life that you'd be okay living every day that way, just forever, with no texture to your life at all? It's just that one even note. I mean, that really would be horrible, and that's what he's actually living with. And that's like most of human life. I mean, that a lot of it is that. No, not to be a bummer or anything, but that is really a lot of what we have in our lives. It's just that, making lunch and all of that stuff. So I don't know. I kind of feel like it really is despair. It really is something. But it's also the kind of thing maybe that from the outside you can't make sense of. And so maybe from the outside it has to look like depression, and there's no way to understand it otherwise. As far as, is it an excuse to be a bad friend? Yeah, I think sometimes maybe it's the cause of being a bad friend in the sense that you might say, in the name of this despair, I'll cut off my fingers, I'll destroy my friendships, I'll let my house be burned down. Because he could have stopped it, right? He looks the policeman in the eye in the church, and he could have said, go get him. The policeman would have been very happy to beat up Patrick at that point. But he doesn't. He doesn't stop any of this stuff. He's like, Patrick becomes the kind of engine of his own destruction that he does that very deliberately, right? He creates that for himself. So I mean, it doesn't seem like he has any interest in being a bad friend except to destroy all of the things in his life, just to give it some kind of texture or something.
It just occurs to me actually that, like, if I think about my own life, whenever I'm a bad friend, it's because of despair. Like, if it's an excuse, then it'll always work. It's our own suffering that makes us indifferent to the suffering of others. That's sort of it. That's the only thing that makes us indifferent to the suffering of others is our own suffering, right? And it's never anything else. And clearly, sometimes some of that is unjustified because, like, there's such a thing as being a bad friend, and it's always motivated, I think, by despair of some kind. So there's then just going to be a question about, like, what's the limit point or something? How much despair can you feel where that now is sort of like legitimates the way that you're treating your friend? Maybe it never legitimates it. Maybe it's just that it can be forgiven, I guess. I guess that's what I would say. It might be forgivable, but not legitimate.
Yeah, hey, so when I was watching this movie, I think there's this thing that really jumps out to me, that it feels in many ways to be kind of in dialogue with James Joyce's The Dead, which, I mean, situated at a very similar time period. And, I mean, for those of you who haven't read The Dead, I don't want to spoil it, it's probably one of the greatest short stories in the English language, but there's this moment of realization of the hollowness of kind of the relationship in the protagonist's life. And I think that our protagonist here kind of has a similar moment where he realizes that the relationship between him and Colm is actually perhaps didn't even exist. I mean, that's sort of further buttressed by the fact that we don't ever see any, I mean, we're only ever told that they were great friends. We don't actually see any, like, with our own eyes. The camera never shows us, demonstrates to us that they were good friends. I mean, in fact, it's, to me, Dominic is the only one that it seems is actually good friends with Patrick. I mean, there are these continuous scenes where they, you know, kind of have this jovial banter and they talk and they really share each other's, you know, kind of deeper, you know, problems and sort of tragic moments. And so I think it's funny to me that we're framing this movie through the idea that Colm and Patrick were ever friends, but I don't think that's actually clear. I think the sort of realization of the movie is that they weren't ever friends. This was an illusionary idea, and that Patrick has now reached this state where, you know, he understands that.
I mean, so I guess I think, so like if you think about what happens with Dominic, where Dominic says, I thought you were nice, but actually you're not any better than any of the rest of them. They're like, Dominic has almost like the self-respect to have that realization and say, you're not nice and I don't want to be friends with you anymore. And Patrick never has that. He never has that moment. I mean, he, you know, once Colm has killed his donkey, now he wants to kill him, but he doesn't, like, this is sort of Arnold's point about the speech in the bar, the drunken speech, where Patrick doesn't move on from that and say, okay, now that I know who you are, I want to have nothing to do with you. He moves on from that to, like, once again try to, you know, get him to be his friend.
Friendship. That's like, if anything, I don't think that's this kind of notion of philia or brotherly love. That's more so this kind of almost erotic idea of being like transfixed with the person.
Maybe, but it's, I don't have a sense that it's so different from whatever it was they had before. That is, I feel like, so like I think that, you know, what happens in The Dead, and I won't give it away either, but is like someone having their illusions about their life really pierced in this like sudden moment of epiphany, which, you know, the book that it's part of, Dubliners, is actually, each of the stories involves some kind of epiphany, right? Joyce was really into epiphanies. And I don't think that Patrick has an epiphany. Dominic has an epiphany, right? But Patrick doesn't have one. He just, you know, keeps pushing and pushing and pushing until this thing happens, and now he wants revenge. And he has a pseudo-epiphany where he's like, maybe you were never nice. But it proves not to be a Dominic-style epiphany. So it seems to me not to be a movie that foregrounds this idea of epiphany. In a way, the movie has the kind of skepticism about epiphanies that I've come to think, under Arnold's pressure, is a more appropriate way of thinking about epiphanies than Joyce's way of thinking about epiphanies. Joyce is very optimistic. Joyce thinks you can just suddenly, in one moment, come to understand your life. And now all of a sudden you've got it. And that's somehow stable. Like as though Gabriel Conroy is stably going to understand this thing that he sees in the snowy window or whatever. And I think the person who made this movie thinks more the way Arnold thinks, which is that, like, okay, you have this like momentary thought, and then you go on as you did before. It doesn't really change your life.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I think that's a good question. That is how real could their friendship have been. And I mean, so the movie does take some pains to give us some signs that it was substantive, or at least that Colm really does have some tenderness and protectiveness towards Patrick, right? When he picks him up off the ground after he's been beaten, where he seems to be pained by what he's doing to Patrick, and where, like at the end of the movie where he sort of chats with him, he has like a little small talk with him. Small talk's sort of important to the movie in a way, like, and it's the impossibility of small talk that is precisely the problem with them. He says we can just chat about something else. Like it's in a way all Patrick wants is small talk, and he gets offered it a couple of times, and so yeah, it could have been that they weren't really friends, but the last thing is at the bar he says I like him again, suggesting that he did like him before. But you have to be right that they were never a good match. He always thought Patrick was dull. He always thought he was stupid and not on his level, and not a serious person the way he was a serious person, because he's an Irish fiddler and Patrick is just this silly cowherd who talks about his animals too much. But that in some sense he must have liked that, right? And that has ceased to be something that he can have in his life. I'm also a little skeptical about the friendship with Dominic. Like, in a way, it's a mirror, right? Patrick looks down on Dominic. He doesn't see him as an equal. He sees him as a kind of... it's really important to him, actually, that he sees him as stupider than him, and that's why it bothers him so much when Dominic uses the French word.
Yeah.
And Dominic's situation maybe is the way that Patrick sometimes looks to Colm, which is that Dominic follows him around out of desperate need, because Patrick is the only one that's nice to him. But that it's sort of like Dominic wouldn't choose him. And it's only when Dominic leaves does Patrick, I think, have the understanding that Dominic had chosen him. It wasn't just that he was the only person that would tolerate his presence. It's that Dominic actually saw something in him that was valuable, but now he didn't. But I guess both of them seem like imperfect but substantive or real friendships. And I guess really the question is just, what does time do here? I mean, can we evaluate a friendship on the basis of properties that shared by or relations shared by two people? Because then, two people could be friends having hardly met. And so or is a friendship made up only of time? In which case, the idea that they're an odd match is that's neither here nor there. Or even that their friendship is flawed or based on contempt or something like that is neither here nor there, as long as there's time. But I don't know which of those it's supposed to be. It seems like it's a weird mix of those two. But I guess I hesitate to call it unreal just because there was contempt and just because there was that kind of intellectual distance. I mean, maybe that can be a part of friendship.
I just want to add one thing. So it's just occurring to me what this really brings out is how important is equality in either a friendship or a romantic relationship. And it looks like when there is inequality, then you get this setup where the one person appears to be sort of desperate. And the other person, the higher person, he's sort of serving this role of almost validating the lower person by being their friend, whereas the lower person is not serving any role for the higher person, so there's something unstable there. And so that we all sense that, and so then there's this conceit of equality in many friendships, and romantic relationships, right? There's a conceit, there's a kind of pretense of equality, but in fact, that's just going to rarely be the case. Maybe there's enough ability to look away from it or something in many cases so that you can create equality through fuzzy vision, right? But if we were to say that no unequal relationships are ever real relationships, I think we'd be carving off many relationships.
Just while the microphone is moving, I do want to point out that this thing that I just noticed on this viewing, which is that Patrick, when Colm starts playing the tune that he wrote, Patrick rolls his eyes, as if many, many times he's heard Colm go on about his music. Everybody knows to roll their eyes, and it's not a big deal. So there's like a kind of symmetry in the contempt almost that Patrick could be like, look at this guy, pretending there's something better than being a coward in Ireland or something.
That also gets at the idea of delusion, right? Like, Colm is kind of delusional about his own ability as like a heroic figure, that like he isn't actually that good of a composer or that important as a figure. Like, he compares himself to Mozart. Clearly he's not that.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So there's the scene in the pub where Colm, I think, asks Pádraic, like, who's remembered for being nice? And while there's like a painting or like picture of like Jesus Christ hanging right above
That's a good.
Colm in the pub.
That's a good catch.
So that kind of leads into my question of, there's a ton, like an overwhelming amount of religious like symbolism in the film, like, between like transitional scenes, like it just cuts to like a cross on the top of a hill or like in a field or something, right? There's like it's so much like religious stuff going on. So I'm just wondering, what were you guys' thoughts about like all the religious symbolism in the film, about Christianity and religious?
That's a great point about Jesus being remembered for being nice. That hadn't occurred to me. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so Patrick is not religious in any discernible way. Right? We see no religious expression from him at all. Colm goes to confession twice. We don't ever see Patrick going to confession. Colm goes to confession twice, but he's skeptical. That is, he sounds a little like an atheist to me. Especially this remark about pride that he has. He doesn't understand why that's a sin. Or if not an atheist, somebody who's sees himself at a certain distance from religious practice or belief, really, or sees it as mere practice or something like that. And then there's this moment, maybe, of understanding at the end. I guess the way I'd read the maybe God should care about miniature donkeys line is as the opposite of the pride line, right? It's that, like, maybe you really do have to notice tiny little things and see moral significance in everything or something like that, which is, that's something like the Christian idea. And that's the problem with pride, is that you just become blind to miniature donkeys and their moral significance. You're right. Another thing that I'd been trying to sort out in my head was this statue of Mary at the crossroads. And, I mean, this clearly played a really big role in the movie, this crossroads, and these decisions that were sort of made around the crossroads, people splitting up and going separate ways or meeting there. I don't know. I find all of that pretty puzzling, but I guess I see religion ultimately as having a kind of negative presence in the movie, as if it were written by somebody who is just really deeply disappointed in the force of religion in our lives. There are these sort of ruined crosses. There's this iconography around. It seems to matter not at all. People just ignore the statue of Mary. They don't pay any real attention to it. The priest is saying these things. He's obviously a terrible priest.
He's speaking in Latin, which no one can understand.
Yeah. That's the Catholics. You gotta
their
get
thing. Yeah, I know. I like Latin.
But you're right. You could see it from a Protestant point of view that's a problem. And then there's this last shot, right? Of like soaring over the.
Which is also the first shot.
Yeah, coming over the light coming out from behind the clouds, soaring over Ireland, as if God is watching all of this, and just there's nothing. There's no presentation. And I guess my thought with the idea of that the end of the friendship as a kind of miraculous event is that it's a kind of anti-miracle, and that there's no corresponding miracle. That's the thing that's really the way in which the movie is disappointed in religion, is that there is no countervailing real miracle or positive miracle. There's just the anti-miracle, and then the eventual collapse into violence.
The silence of God,
yeah.
to quote Bergman. Yeah, I the thing that strikes me about the movie is how irreligious Dominic is. Right? So if you recall in the scene where he's just been beat up by his dad and he meets Parik and Siobhan on their way to church, and he like curses at, I can't remember what the curse is that he says, but they're like shocked by it, right? And he's like, I'm not going to church. And yet Dominic clearly is in touch with goodness, and it matters to him. And so it does seem to me that the movie presents religion in a skeptical way, but maybe I like Arnold's thought. I really didn't know what to make of the religious stuff in the movie, and maybe the thought is that the movie is expressing a kind of disappointment with religion. Religion is not where it's supposed to be. There's a certain kind of solace, a certain kind of order, a certain kind of goodness that it could be providing, and it isn't. And this is the world that, the world where God is silent, and the world where instead of like religion, what we have is almost like witches, like this Banshee woman, right? And this kind of sorcery and magic, and yeah.
Thank you.
So my question is about Dominic. I was wondering what the role it plays for him to die in the end. I was almost thinking, is it an analogy saying that all goodness and nice people die first, whether physically or metaphysically? So yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I was thinking about that this time too, because like in some way this movie is a tragedy, and the really tragic thing that happens is Dominic dying. But it's sort of backgrounded in this weird way where it's like serves as the narration of Parik's letter to Siobhan. On our way to finding out whether or not Colm died or not, and it sort of passes us by in this weird way. Like it's like something had to be done with the character, and he was gotten out of the way. But you're not really. It's the death of Dominic isn't really presented in a way where you can mourn him. I found that, at least on this view, I found that to be interesting, but I'm not sure what to make of it.
So I feel less good about Dominic than I think some of you do. That is, his speech about I thought you were one of the nice ones does make him really seem like he's good at heart and he's the one that's supposed to stand for goodness. But Patrick is really pained by what he does to that guy. And it's not that bad of a trick. And it's like he is a nice guy. I mean, he is a basically good person. I mean, they're all basically good people. I don't think that there's anybody in there that's like really deep down bad except the police officer. But that said, I guess my thought about Dominic is that one of those things that the movie's about, maybe the main line of thought in the movie, is that there are things that we need from other people that they don't owe us, but we still need them anyway. That there was nobody that owed Dominic salvation, right? There was nobody that owed him a night away from his father. There was nobody that owed him, love, right? The way that Siobhan denied him love. And that this was his hope. Like from the beginning of the movie, you get the sense that this is his hope for himself, is that he can have a house and a place and have I don't know, that it was Siobhan, if she was really important to the fantasy, but that was the thing keeping him alive. And it's like, all of these characters in some sense have something that they need from other people, that they really desperately need from other people, but that those other people do not owe them, and that they deny them. And that there's nothing wrong with denying them, but it's fatal. When we don't get those things, we die. I guess what I took from the death of Dominic was that it was a way of expressing that point, that ultimately there's something fatal about that need, even though the tragedy of human life is that it cannot be structured such that we can owe people the fulfillment of that need. we just have to hope that it gets fulfilled. Like, nobody can make a law about who should love who or anything like that.
I think that's really great. I now think that's what this movie is about. I'm just going to repeat. I wrote down what Arnold said. I'm just going to repeat it because I think it's really good. There are things we need from other people that they don't owe us, but we need them anyways. That makes sense to me as like what this movie is depicting. And then the death of Dominic would fit there. I mean, the weird part would be, and I guess the other side would be, Perrick needs Colm as his friend. And Colm does not owe that to him, but Perrick just needs it anyway.
Yeah, and Colm has these sort of like libertarian lines about like, you know, I'm me, and I don't know other people at things, and it can be about me, and it's like, it can. He's right. I mean, he's not wrong about that. I mean, and the most. It's almost like the Siobhan Dominic story is there to put a point on that because the Colm Patrick story is a little ambiguous. You sort of wonder, maybe they do owe each other something.
Right.
Or something like
it's
that.
like very clear that she doesn't owe Dominic love.
And nobody could. I mean, it's a little funny even to think that she could owe him that, or that he could somehow expect it, and he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't think she owes him anything. But nevertheless, he dies of its lack.
Right. That's great.
Hello.
Hey.
So I think there's like this implicit assumption we have when we do like philosophy or thinkers in the movie generally, that like every question like should be asked and that like seeking an answer for it is useful. But then this movie seems to kind of suggest that like it might be that like if Pedrick hadn't been thrown into like kind of this anti-miracle, that he would have like always been fine. And similarly with Colm. And so like I guess my question then is like is that like a fundamental assumption of like thinking wrong? Like I think the question of like Professor Brooks, for example, has said like a couple places that, for example, having this time at the pub is what gives Pedrick's life significance, or that this project of like having a family is what gives Dominic's life meaning. But it seems to me that almost like before the question is asked, none of those characters would say, my reason of getting up in the morning is for this to happen, right? There's something about asking the question which makes it a problem. And so, is that fair? Could you see this movie as like almost anti being a thinker?
Yeah, I mean, the dream of philosophy is to have a life and an understanding of that life such that you could live it and be stably happy with it, right? That's what ethics is sort of about. And the reality of the situation is that most of us can find ways to get along as long as the self-understanding part gets to be skipped, right? As long as we don't have to ask questions about sort of who we are and like, you know, what we're really up to. So, I mean, maybe one of the things that sort of narratives do for us is that they contrast that, you know, maybe sometimes very distant philosophical dream with the reality of life lived without it, right? I mean, with life where understanding is destructive. And I mean, this is a little just like the question, is philosophy a bunch of bullshit? Because, you know, if it's destructive all the way down, if that self-understanding always destroys what we have, then it is. Then it's better just not to do it. Part of the thing, I mean, one of the things that's interesting, I think, about the story is that these people who are really unhappy, the people who blow up their lives in a way, are precisely these thinkers. They're these people who look for points of stability, look for points of meaning when they could have gotten along, right? And maybe in answer to my question, like, what is time doing in this story? Like, how could something be changed by time alone? Maybe it's something like that for a human being, something can be changed by time alone just because eventually you are faced with a question about what your life is about. I don't know if Patrick could have gone the whole way. I mean, he really does seem like an animal sometimes. Like he literally becomes a kind of barnyard animal at the end. Like he's like inviting the animals in to live with him, and he seems to really identify with them. I mean, in some sense, the love of his life is this donkey, which is admittedly extremely cute, and it's very sad when it dies. It's the second death, I think, right? She says there's going to be a death, maybe two, and maybe it's a death. It's the second one. I mean, it gets a whole grave and everything.
Right, I didn't think about that. That's why it's maybe two, because it's not clear whether it counts.
Yeah, but if your question is philosophy a bunch of bullshit? I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, so is it? I mean, what's your thought?
So I feel like there are two things you can say, and they might both be true. And one is that the examination of one's own life is like the most self-destructive thing that one can do, on the one hand. You could think that. You could think it's the source of the greatest kind of self-destruction. And you could also think the unexamined life is not worth living. Notice the claim that the unexamined life is not worth living doesn't even say that the examined life is worth living, right? It's just like, well, if there's going to be anything worth living, it's going to be in the examined life. And so, like, the real question, I think, is whether we think about Perick's life before this movie started as, like, a perfectly good and happy life. And I suppose that the movie, what I feel the movie is telling me, if I'm not thinking as a philosopher, I'm just thinking as a viewer of this movie, I feel like the movie was trying to tell me, yes, that he was fine, that it was good. There were rainbows behind him, everyone was saying hi, like, he was having a good day, he was having a good life, and, like, you can just be perfectly fine without any philosophy. And then this thing comes in. Now, that's what the movie, I feel, wants to tell me. I don't think that's true. But in a way, even if I don't think it's true, I could agree with the claim about self-destruction.
I disagree about what the movie's trying to tell us. I think that the movie's message about Patrick might be, like, way darker. That, because it matters whether or not we can admire Patrick. And they don't make him admirable until they put him in a nice suit and have him threaten to burn somebody's house down. And then right at the end where he's, like, all badass.
That's true.
Then he seems admirable. Then he seems like a real person with a kind of internal machinery. You can see that he no longer worries about the contempt others might have for him, right? He doesn't have the kind of social anxiety that invites our contempt. He is a mission now. There's like something that he's going to do. Right at the end of the movie, in that last scene in the movie, he ceases to be an interesting character in a certain way because he suddenly becomes every movie character ever. He's just got this like stupid, destructive vision. He's like John Wick now. He's gonna like go off and just be violent for no good reason, and like, but that's the moment where he fits into somebody that like the heroic type. That's the moment we can really admire him. So I sort of think that the movie's saying something like, maybe he was happy, but he wasn't a real person. But maybe those are actually separate things, and maybe the thought is, you can be happy, but you can't also be a real person.
Okay, I think we can let's take 2 more questions.
Just a reminder, if you ask a question, you can get a sweatshirt down there.
Yeah, t-shirt, or do we have tote bags too?
Oh, yeah, tote bag.
Yeah, so you can have your choice, unless we run out.
I have a question about like the difference between niceness and goodness, because niceness is like a prevalent theme throughout the movie. Everyone is trying to either be nice or stop being nice, but like the idea of religion or Jesus related to niceness is kind of counterintuitive to me, because I don't think niceness, like how do we draw the line between niceness and goodness? A person being really nice could be, it feels to me like there could be virtue or vice in disguise behind this veil of niceness. So, like, I just want to ask about your guys' opinions on, should we be nice or be good?
I think that's a really good point. It sort of relates back to the question about religion, because maybe religion gives you a way of substantiating niceness as so that it really counts for something. And then without that religious backdrop, it can be hard to know whether somebody is just making a situation socially smooth or whether they're actually like displaying some real virtue of kindness or beneficence or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only from a sort of modern or maybe Christian inflected point of view that we would even associate them, right? Because niceness is sometimes thought of, we might think of it as coming apart from goodness in being the mere show of it. Whereas goodness is the deep thing. And so we often write characters like House, MD, which was a show that I loved when I was in college, though it hasn't aged well.
No.
But
no one in this room has ever watched House.
Okay, well, yeah, some people watch it.
Okay, 3 people.
Where he's an asshole, but he's supposed to be good, right? And so we will write characters that are assholes where the goodness is supposed to be especially, to especially shine through because they're assholes, right? And so they're not nice, but they are good. So there's that real sense that those things can come apart in that way. But of course, the perspective on life on which you have to write great poetry or something like that, or great music in order to be somebody. That's got nothing to do with niceness or kindness or genuine generosity or real empathy or any of the things that we might associate with a deeper goodness. So it's almost as if the conflict is between niceness and something that, like maybe niceness as something that's reaching for something like Christian goodness, and a view which is totally alien to that, right? The sort of pride that he's talking about as being a kind of like glory or something like that. But I think you're right. I mean, so one the problem with niceness, I take it, is something like it doesn't last in precisely the sense that it's not maintained by a deep sense of the good that you're accomplishing. It's just as long as everything is going well, one is nice, right? The cliche about nice guys is that they're nice, but then there's a point of rejection where they cease to be nice. And
So
become very, very
deep.
bad or something like
Right.
that. Yeah.
Superficial.
It's a superficial presentation of goodness that doesn't run deep. But I sort of think that the way that the word is being used in this movie, it really does mean something deeper than that. Patrick really is nice. I mean, he doesn't like Dominic either. I mean, he almost can't stand him. But he really does. I mean, he offers him, his instinct is to offer him a place to stay. He's the one that sort of is willing to protect him. He really does seem nice to me in a way that's deeper than circumstance. It's like he's willing to suffer costs for being nice to somebody. I don't know. That's a little indecisive, I think, but that's what I've got.
Does goodness not have a limit then?
Does it not have a limit?
Right, if you say you're gonna be nice up to a point, and then you're gonna burn a house down. But
yeah.
Does goodness not have a limit?
Yeah, so maybe the best way to put it is that niceness is a relational thing, right? We can be nice to each other, and that depends on a certain kind of relation that we have for each other. But goodness is something that just comes from me, right? So if I'm good, then I'm going to treat you well, regardless of how you behave. And the thing that everybody kept looking for in Patrick, and he kept failing to provide, was something that came from within him. It always seemed like it was just the relation, right? He never seemed to have an inside. And then he finds it with rage. That's the thing that gives him an interior. It gives him a personality. And that's the first thing that he gets. But somehow the problem is that he really does seem nice. It's almost like it's not, that really was somehow deeper in him than a mere show.
Maybe it's just that those relationships, the superficial whatever relationships, were really quite important to him. So yes, the niceness was just a feature of this setup of these relations, but on a small island where everybody knows everybody, you've captured all the relations you're ever going to have, and if those are all nice, then you're nice. And of course, what the movie reveals is that isn't enough, right? Because you have new people showing up to the island, and then Patrick being willing to be like extremely mean to them, and then also willing to turn on his old friends. But I think it can be harder to distinguish niceness from goodness when like the set of relations is in some way closed, like on a small island.
Yeah, I mean, it may be one of the tragedies of the movie and maybe of human life, and maybe this is sort of what the movie's about, that he's the only one that really finds, like, a lot of the characters, I think, are looking for something in themselves to build a life around, or to build a personality around, or to some kind of inner source in themselves. And he's the only one that finds one, and the only thing he finds is murderous rage. And it's like, reflecting on that, and again, I don't want to be a bummer, but reflecting on that, it really is like, that's the only thing that feels like an answer for sure, is that rage is the kind of thing where you can be like, yeah, okay, this is what a life can be about, and it feels like that for sure. Whereas everything else we have, which all the other stuff is much better, that's a terrible answer, but everything else we have doesn't feel certain. It feels like, yeah, is this really what a life could be about? Because, like, is philosophy, is that really a thing that you could have your life be about? Is family really a thing that you could have your life be about? You have doubts all the time about that stuff. Nobody ever doubts rage, though.
Mm. Okay, last question.
One thing that stood out to me when I was watching it was kind of this like lack of romantic relationships. Except sort of between like Dominic and had that kind of disillusion and all of that. But like, so it almost seems like the world existed kind of in this vacuum of relationships, and it almost seemed like they were portrayed as these characters weren't good enough for that. Like this idea that like Dominic like didn't like Warren, so like he seemed like undesirable, and like how like Patrick's sister just like got mad when somebody brought up the idea of having a family. So it seemed like they lived in this world where like romance wasn't even an option, and it almost felt like the world was already crumbling. And I wonder how that kind of played into the way that friendship was displayed, and as kind of like the second best option that they were kind of like clinging on to.
That's a great point. I really hadn't thought about that fact about this movie, that it's very unromantic, that there are like no couples, right? Like
no children either.
I mean, they're grown. Siobhan and Parak had like parents, but they're dead, so there are no young children, and we really don't even see many young children. There must be some, but I'm not recalling. And
sorry, the police officer did this.
Oh yeah, that's right. That good point. Okay, so that's maybe the only one. So there's like, so there's not romance and there's not children, and so you just have these adults that are sort of aimless, trying to do something with their lives, by friendship, by music. But I don't know what, I guess I don't have a thought about why romance is cut out of the picture. Maybe it's to simplify, like to tell you about a certain problem and not muddy the waters by adding all the complexity that romance would add. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, the big problem or the consistent problem for the characters in the movie is this relationship to hope, right? So Patrick is sort of tortured by his hope for his like having some kind of relationship with Calm, and Calm himself just seems hopeless. Siobhan seems to be on the edge of that hopelessness. I took the line about "Aren't you ever lonely?" to be something like a line about marriage. For her, I mean, they bring up a bunch of times, why hasn't she gotten married? Why isn't she? I mean, she's like sort of the best person there, so she could sort of like be interested in going and finding a life elsewhere. That there's something sort of hopeless about the situation, and no children is a great way to present hopelessness, right? That there's no future here. It's just this sort of mundane petering out of human beings, and then Dominic has this hope that he can have a relationship with Siobhan, and the collapse of that hope is just the end of him. So maybe I mean that romantic relationships really are, maybe more than anything else, sort of about hope, right? That and maybe that's why they need to move. They need to have a kind of a kind of sense of forward progress. Like it's very hard to have a romantic relationship and think, oh, it can just be like this forever, right? It's like that nobody's very happy with that. People want it to be going somewhere because the idea of hope is sort of built into it in a really deep way. And I don't know, maybe that has something to do with children or something. I don't know. But yeah, all of these characters are sort of struggling with that kind of hopelessness. And the impossibility of a romantic relationship is just the hope, the way that hopelessness takes shape for them. I don't know. Maybe that's the. I don't know. I hate symbolism, but maybe that's the crown. I mean, right? That she's this horrible old woman, and she's sort of alone. And she's like, she's sort of beckoning to the.
She seems kind of happy.
Yeah, she's delighted by this whole thing, but she's kind of she kind of beckons to Siobhan, almost as if she's saying, like, you know, this is your future. You're the old crone of this island in a little bit. That she's a kind of symbol of hopelessness or something like that. But I don't know. I that's all I've got.
Okay. On that note of it being all we got, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for staying, and look forward to seeing you at our next Night Owls early in spring quarter. Bye.